Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be talking about something really, really interesting, the U.S. immigration crackdown during the Trump administration. And we've got a great article that goes really deep on it. And I think it's so fascinating because this period was so controversial, and people are still arguing about whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, was it absolutely necessary to secure the border, or was it a humanitarian crisis?
Yeah, I mean, that's the core issue, right? It really highlights that tension that we always have with immigration. How do we keep the country safe, but also be welcoming to people who want to come here? What does the American dream even mean in the 21st century?
Well, let's get into the specifics. So the article starts by talking about all the actions that the Trump administration took to crack down on immigration. Like, they really went all out with deportations and putting the military at the border, making it a lot harder to get asylum.
Oh, yeah, they were serious about reducing illegal immigration. And they actually had some pretty dramatic results. Like, in just 1 month, illegal border crossings dropped by a whopping 70%.
70%. Wow, that's a huge drop. So I guess you could say that the crackdown was a success in some ways, but I'm sure it wasn't that simple. So what were the arguments from the people who supported these measures? What made them think this crackdown was so necessary?
Well, there were a few main arguments. First of all, national security. A lot of people believed that uncontrolled borders made the country vulnerable to all sorts of threats, like terrorism and drug trafficking. They saw this as a way to protect American lives and interests.
Oh, yeah, it makes sense, right? Like, it's that basic instinct to protect your home and your family. People want to feel safe and secure.
Exactly. And then there was the argument about upholding the rule of law, the idea that if you let people break the rules by entering the country illegally, it undermines the whole immigration system.
So it's about fairness and playing by the rules. And I imagine there was also a concern about protecting American jobs and resources.
Right. Oh. Yeah, for sure. A lot of supporters argued that unchecked illegal immigration hurts American workers. It drives down wages and makes it harder for them to find jobs. And they also talked about the strain on social services, like healthcare and education and welfare programs. All those things are funded by taxpayers.
Yeah. So it's about prioritizing the needs of American citizens. And I can see how that message resonated with a lot of people. But the article also talks about the huge backlash against these policies. So what were the main arguments from the other side?
Well, the critics of the crackdown were very vocal. They argued that these measures were inhumane and that they violated basic human rights. They pointed to the fact that deportations were often carried out very quickly and that people didn't always have a chance to go through a fair legal process, especially asylum seekers. Imagine fleeing your home country because of danger and then being turned away at the border without even having your case heard.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking. So it's this clash between the need for security and control on one hand and the desperate pleas of people seeking refuge on the other.
Exactly. And the human cost of the crackdown was really hard to ignore. You know, we saw those images of families being separated at the border and children being held in detention centers. There were reports of overcrowding and mistreatment. It became a moral crisis.
It's easy to forget that behind all the policy debates and statistics, there are real people with families and hopes and dreams. Their lives were upended.
Yeah, the impact was far-reaching. It put a lot of strain on sanctuary cities. They were trying to provide support for these families, but they were also dealing with a very complex legal landscape. And then there was the economic impact. You know, a lot of industries rely on migrant labor, like agriculture and construction and the service sector. When the workforce suddenly shrank, those sectors really felt the pinch.
So this crackdown had a ripple effect. It affected local communities and the national economy, even international relations.
Exactly. And to really understand how divided people were on this issue, the article talks about this House hearing, where Republicans and Democrats just clash head-on over immigration policies. It was like a microcosm of the whole debate.
A political showdown. I bet it got pretty heated.
Yeah, it did. The Republicans were really focused on sanctuary cities. They argued that these cities were making the U.S. less safe because they were hindering federal immigration enforcement. They saw it as a challenge to their authority.
So it was a power struggle between the federal government and local governments.
And the Democrats argued that these local policies were actually making things safer because they fostered trust between immigrant communities and law enforcement. They saw it as a pragmatic approach.
So it's fascinating how this one issue, sanctuary cities, became such a lightning rod.
Yeah, it really encapsulates that tension between security and compassion, control and autonomy.
It's a microcosm of the whole immigration debate.
With all these deeply held beliefs about national identity and security and human rights.
It's a debate that's far from over. Even though the Trump era is behind us, the challenges and the questions remain. So where do we go from here? What's next for U.S. immigration policy?
Well, that is the big question, right? The article talks about some possible ways forward, but they all have their own challenges. One idea that's been around forever is comprehensive immigration reform.
Yeah, comprehensive reform. It's one of those things that everyone talks about, but it never seems to happen. So what does it actually mean? Is there anything real behind it, or is it just a buzzword?
Oh, it's a real thing, but it's super complicated. Basically, it's about creating a way for undocumented immigrants to become legal citizens, but they'd have to meet certain requirements, like paying taxes and learning English and passing a background check. It's about bringing them out of the shadows.
Right, so it's acknowledging that millions of people are already living and working here illegally and trying to find a way to integrate them into society.
Exactly. But it's not just about giving amnesty. It also involves strengthening border security and going after employers who hire undocumented workers and making the legal immigration process easier. It's about trying to create a system that works for everyone.
It sounds like a tough balancing act, trying to make everyone happy.
It is, and that's why it's so hard to get it done. But the thing is, the current system isn't working either. It's costing taxpayers a lot of money, and it's tearing families apart. And it's leaving everyone feeling frustrated.
So maybe comprehensive reform, even though it's difficult, is still better than doing nothing. Are there any other options?
Yeah, definitely. Another big issue is the asylum process. It's completely overwhelmed, and it needs a serious overhaul. People who are fleeing persecution and violence often have to wait years for their cases to be heard. Their lives are just on hold.
It seems like the system is designed to discourage people from even trying to seek asylum.
One solution is to put more resources into the system so that claims can be processed faster and more fairly. We could also look at alternatives to detention, like community-based programs that provide support and supervision while people are waiting for their hearings.
So instead of punishing people, we should be trying to help them.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of addressing the root causes of migration. Like we talked about earlier, people are leaving Central America because of poverty and violence and lack of opportunity. If we want to reduce the number of people coming to the U.S., we need to help improve conditions in those countries.
So we need to fix the problems at the source instead of just reacting to the symptoms. But how do we even start to do that?
It's a long-term project that requires cooperation between the U.S. and the governments in those countries. It's about promoting economic growth and strengthening democratic institutions and fighting corruption and investing in education and healthcare.
So it's about giving people the tools they need to build a better life in their own countries.
Exactly. And it's not just about being nice. A more stable and prosperous Central America is good for the U.S. too. It means more trade and more security. It's a win-win situation.
So it's about recognizing that we're all connected. What happens in one part of the world affects us all. And speaking of connections, the article also mentions the growing role of technology in border security.
Oh yeah, that's a hot topic. We're already seeing drones being used for surveillance and facial recognition technology at ports of entry and sensors that can detect movement in remote areas. It's about creating a virtual border.
It sounds like something out of a movie.
Some people think it's a great idea. They say that technology can make border security more efficient and effective. Drones can cover more ground than human patrols, and sensors can pick up on activity that people might miss. The goal is to stop illegal crossings and smuggling.
So it's about using technology to our advantage. But I'm sure there are also concerns.
Oh yeah, for sure. One of the biggest concerns is privacy. People worry that increased surveillance will erode civil liberties and make people afraid to speak their minds. There's also concern about bias in facial recognition and other technologies, which could lead to discrimination against certain groups.
So technology can be a double-edged sword.
And then there's the cost. These high-tech systems are expensive to set up and maintain. The question is, are they worth the money?
It's a complicated issue with no easy answers. I guess we have to decide as a society how much security we're willing to give up for freedom. How do we balance control with human rights?
Those are the big questions we need to be asking ourselves as we try to figure out the future of immigration policy.
We've covered a lot today. From the details of the Trump-era crackdown to the possible solutions, it's a complicated issue, and it's emotional for a lot of people. But it's something we need to pay attention to. Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in all the politics and stuff, but we have to remember that this is about real people. There are actual human beings behind all these statistics, with their own hopes and dreams.
Absolutely. It's so important to remember that when we talk about this issue, we're not just talking about ideas. We're talking about the lives of real people, people who are just trying to make a better life for themselves, often in very difficult circumstances.
Yeah, we need to recognize their humanity. Try to understand why they would leave everything behind and risk so much to come to a new country.
And it means we have to challenge our own assumptions, try to see the world through their eyes and have empathy for their situation.
Empathy. Everyone talks about empathy, but what does that actually mean? How can we actually make a difference in these people's lives?
Oh, I think it starts with listening, really listening to the stories of people who've been affected by these policies and educating ourselves about the issue, understanding the history and the systems that create these problems.
Yeah, we need to move beyond the sound bites and the slogans and have real conversations with each other, even if we disagree.
And then we need to take action, whether that's volunteering our time or donating to organizations that help immigrants or advocating for changes in the laws.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to challenge you to think about this issue in a new way, not just with your head, but with your heart. Step outside your comfort zone and connect with the human side of this story.
Because in the end, immigration policy isn't just about rules and regulations. It's about what kind of society we want to be. Do we want to be a society that is fair and compassionate? Or do we want to be a society that is closed off and afraid?
So we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this issue? What solutions do you think would work? How can we create a more just and humane approach to immigration?
Let us know in the comments. We need to keep talking about this because it's through dialogue that we can find common ground and make progress.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you learned something new and that you'll keep thinking about these issues. Until next time, keep diving deep and stay curious.